Welcome to Building the Future. I'm your host, Kevin Horick. You can check out new episodes of the show every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. If you missed an episode or want to get more information about the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com. Welcome back to the show. Today we have Tom Goldenberg. He's the CTO and co-founder at Commandiv. Tom, welcome to the show.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. You have kind of an interesting background and kind of you write heavily kind of online and you publish a bunch of stuff, and you were actually voted one of the LinkedIn top voices of 2016, number 8 in tech. So that's kind of a huge accomplishment. I don't think people maybe necessarily realize that, but congrats on that. But maybe before we kind of dive into exactly what you're doing now, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Sure. Originally from the New Haven, Connecticut area. Didn't go to Yale, but grew up in that area.
Sure.
And I never really was the kind of stereotypical, programmer or computer wizard.
Sure.
I was really into music, actually, and I studied music, most of my high school and college career.
Okay.
So that's kind of like how I grew up. And interestingly enough, after about 2.5 years of college, I decided to basically drop out.
Sure.
And I wanted to do humanitarian work in India. So I lived there for 9 years.
Wow.
Studied some of the languages there. Ended up becoming a Sanskrit teacher at a university there.
Okay.
And came back after 9 years, totally unprepared for life back in the States.
Sure, that's a long time to be away.
Yeah. So there's the culture shock. And then there's also, I had never completed my bachelor's degree.
Sure.
And I had all this experience that was like heavily, just very special in an area that there's not a lot of demand for.
Okay.
And so I applied to some of the PhD programs in South Asian studies, didn't get in, and I was kind of left in the situations like, well, what's next? Okay. And somehow that brought me to coding and to technology.
Sure. No, that's interesting to me, and I think, at least in my experience, I've been in kind of the tech industry for over 20 years now, and I think a lot of kind of designers, developers, kind of a lot of people in tech either kind of grew up playing music or heavily listen to music and still heavily listen to music, right? And it's funny how that kind of, there's a lot of kind of maybe similarities between, I think in some ways kind of doing a startup to like playing in a band and trying to get like signed and making it big is almost a similar road to kind of, trying to be on the top of the charts compared to like being a successful startup. I think they're both kind of a long struggle in a road, or they can be anyway. And so it's interesting to me that you have that kind of background, but I'm kind of curious to know about some of your kind of the boot camp and the accelerator kind of stuff that you're involved in. So maybe do you want to walk me and the listener through kind of both of those?
Sure. So like I said, I came back to the U.S. I was kind of unsure of what I wanted to do next. And I started working for a nonprofit in the city close to the United Nations. And it's funny, there was a data scientist there, and he was leaving the post, and they were looking for someone to fill his role. And someone as a joke had said, well, you should do that, because I was an intern at the time.
Right.
And I thought about it, and my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, said, you're really good with languages. Coding is just another language.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, sure.
And so I talked to the data scientist. He gave me some resources. I went through the Harvard has an online course, CS50, which was really phenomenal, and kind of brought me into that world. And then I, started researching into these coding boot camps.
Okay.
And I figured, I could, either go for another bachelor's degree or try to get an advanced degree in computer science, or I could do one of these programs less than a year and just kind of do how I've done in the past, whether it's learning music, like you said, or learning foreign languages, which I've had a ton of experience in, as a teaching a foreign language, and I'm fluent in at least 4 foreign languages.
Wow.
So that's kind of the approach that I took to it. I did some of the research, ended up going to Dev Boot Camp, one of the several boot camps in New York City.
Okay.
And
why'd you pick that one out of curiosity?
Yeah, so I visited a couple of the programs. Full disclosure, I did try to get into App Academy. I was not accepted.
Okay.
I got into the very final round, and then they said, well, we had to pass. And I said, well, when can I apply again? And said, we don't allow people to do that. You get one shot. So I thought that was weird.
That is weird.
And then, yeah.
Okay.
But I visited Dev Boot Camp. I talked to the instructors. I talked to some of the students. I did feel at the time they had kind of a holistic approach to it. They, they made sure that people worked in teams and groups. There's a capstone project, which is kind of like a mini startup where you have a whole week and a half to come up with an original idea and work with a team. They had, free yoga class, yoga classes built into the curriculum. It was just a nice curriculum that I liked.
Sure.
And so that's eventually why I went with that one. It worked out well.
No, that's great, man. And I love the honesty about, applying and not getting in for whatever reason. I think that's interesting. And I also think, though, that it's important to stress how much, like, I've known a lot of people that have been super successful with and without a university degree. And I know there's kind of like, you can
right.
to argue it, and I don't really care what people kind of have as a background in education. I think it's kind of what they can do, right? There's a lot of people lot of people I've worked with that, have a degree, and a lot of people that don't. And, in some ways, like, there's pros and cons to both, and we don't really need to get into it. But I think that I just kind of want to stress how you can do it either way, really, is what I'm trying to get across, right? And I think that's no, go ahead.
For me, the big thing is, this idea that we live in a meritocracy.
Yeah.
And it's not, I know that, but I think the closest field right now is in technology, where you might not have the credentials, but if you can, contribute on GitHub or, spin up your own side project, there's ways of proving your worth other than a degree. Whereas what I found when I was in the international relations community, I had ideas. I wanted to write. I wanted to publish things. And the answers I got back were, you don't have a master's degree in that. So you can't even get your foot in the door.
Yep.
So that is really a beautiful thing about tech, which is it's measurable by, your value as an employee is measurable by things other than what school you went to or what degree you have. Sure. And, I'm not going to, of course, those things are valuable as well, but there are other ways to show that you have value. And that's something that I definitely appreciate in this industry.
No, I think that's really good advice, actually, right? Because I think at least I've had in my experience where people kind of come up to you and ask you, and it's kind of a loaded question a little bit, right? Because it's kind of like the answer is like, well, it doesn't really matter. Like, you can, both ways aren't exactly, easy, and you need to do different things based on which path you take, right? So I think that's good to talk to somebody like yourself that's done it that way and is willing to openly talk about it. But I'm curious to know, you actually worked in the industry for a couple years before you actually decided to found your own company, or co-found, I should say. So
right.
You don't have to name necessarily the company, but you got through the boot camp, you got through, you started actually working in the industry. What kind of stuff did you end up doing once you got out of the boot camp?
Right. So I was definitely extremely fortunate. I definitely had to hustle to get that first job. And I think whether you're coming out of university or not, like, that's always going to be the proving ground.
Okay.
You're going to have to compromise. You're going to have to really go out of your way to get that first job. And that took me a while. It took me a couple months. And so I started as a contractor for a couple companies actually.
Okay.
And finally, after 2 gigs, I landed on a kind of part-time to full-time role at a company called Agolo. I ended up being there for over a year and a half. One of the greatest experiences.
Nice.
Working for a startup. And I would say to anyone that's interested in entrepreneurship, yes, the Googles and the Microsofts of the world are great, but you're going to learn a lot quicker at a startup.
100% agree.
That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you.
And there are different sides of it, right? Like at an Amazon or a Google, you're going to get the organizational skills, right? Like you're going to see how things are built at scale, but you're not going to get access to a lot of the open source stuff because a lot of these companies have proprietary technology.
Yeah.
And you're not going to have as wide of a range of experiences.
Yep.
And when I was at Agolo, I had that really huge breadth of experience from working with a database design to a machine learning pipeline. We had natural language processing engineers. I was developing the website, full stack, working with designers, UX experience. So I really got the full suite of skills that I'm using now as a CTO.
Sure. No, I think that's great, man. I love that. And I to your point, I think I've kind of worked at startups. I've worked kind of at big companies. I've worked, at the university here. I've kind of worked in marketing agencies. I've worked at software companies. And you're right. I learned the absolute most working at a startup, right? And so it's interesting. So I'm curious though, what made you decide to kind of co-found Commandiv, and what exactly is it?
Sure. So first of all, I've always had the kind of entrepreneurial bug. I think, and the other benefit of startups, if we want to get into kind of the legal area, is
Sure.
When you sign for a larger company, you basically sign away all of your IP, right? So any side project is very hard to do. But at a startup, they're more likely to compromise with you. And so that's what I did throughout my pre-startup founder career, was to say, hey, I'm working the 40, 50 hours a week. On the weekend, I have these side projects. Is that okay? It's non-competitive.
Sure.
And everyone that I worked with was totally fine with that. So I always had something on the side that I was working on, whether it was a mobile app or tutorial or something else like that. Now, what I'm doing now and how I decided to get there, my co-founder, John Zettler, he had been working on this idea of basically bringing kind of tools for the self-directed investor, basically someone who's on Robinhood or E-Trade,
sure,
but wants advice as well.
Okay.
And so what he saw was that there's kind of two extremes where just self-directed is completely do it yourself, where you have a Robinhood or you have an E-Trade.
Yeah.
And then you have these other things which are just set and forget. You have the Betterment or any kind of, usually financial advisors will just put your money into mutual funds or Wealthfront, any of this stuff. There's not really a lot of customization or hands-on tools for you to use. And so that's what we set out to do. We set out to basically add the zero commission cost structure for trading with automated trade suggestions. And it's all based on kind of, modern portfolio theory of having a diversified asset classes. And he approached me with this idea, and I talked to him and I said, I love the idea. I'm not sure that I can quit my job because, I had just found out that we were having a baby, me and my wife.
Sure. Congrats.
And thank you. So I talked with my wife. The three of us talked. We said, okay, this is what we can do. If the idea is able to get into a startup accelerator, then it would be kind of a proof of concept, and then that would give me the impetus to go full time on it.
Interesting.
And that's exactly what happened. 2 days after I said that, and I talked it over with my wife, and I got back to him. He called me on the phone on December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. Said, "Hey, we got in."
That's awesome.
And so yeah. So that's how that started. We just finished that accelerator a couple weeks ago down in Charlotte, North Carolina,
Nice.
and it has just been an amazing journey. I've been doing this whole time for about 6 months now, and we've gotten so much help from the fintech community down in Charlotte, in New York City, and it's just really exciting. So I hope that gives kind of an answer of what we're trying to do. There's a lot of plans that we have for the future, but basically bringing really sophisticated tools to individual investors is what we're trying to do.
Sure. So before we kind of dive a bit deeper into the product, I'm curious. I'm always curious to know how people met their co-founders.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it actually happened. I have a friend. I'm actually gonna meet him for coffee today, Scott Howard, and he's a Georgetown alum.
Okay.
And we had met through a Ruby meetup, and he does mostly kind of consulting work and has run some accelerators, but he's also learning Ruby. So we met, and we've been friends for quite a while, for several years. And we would grab lunch every couple of weeks, and we'd talk about stuff that's going on. And he had mentioned his friend John, who he was friends through the Georgetown network, was looking for someone to work with him on this project. And I actually wasn't interested at this time, but I was like, oh, sure, I'll go meet him and see what it's like. And so that's how I ended up meeting John. And, I planned on just meeting him for coffee for half an hour, and it turned into like a 3.5 hour brainstorming session.
That's cool.
Because
man.
What's that?
That's really cool.
Yeah. I had just had a lot of questions. I've always been interested in investing myself. Not to the level of, doing derivatives and stuff like that, but I've always been interested in it. And I just had a lot of questions. I thought the idea was very interesting. And so we were just kind of really brainstorming. And he actually was working with someone else at this time on the technology side. And for whatever reason, it didn't work out with them. And so that's when we got back in touch. And then, I was basically like, yeah, let's just try it out, no commitment, and see if we like working with each other for, a few weeks, and then we can make a decision.
Sure.
And just kind of low commitment, and I really liked the idea, really liked working together, and that's how it started.
That's awesome, man. I love stories like that. I think they're also interesting because if you never would have went to that meetup, you might not have actually ever met, right?
Right.
So,
and that's such finding a partner is there's so much trust involved.
Yeah.
And there's just so much involved. And I'm really glad that prior to this, these side projects, I worked with other people on them. And so I had some experience of negotiating what's kind of a fair structure for working together.
Sure.
Because that's one of the hardest things that people come against too.
Yep. No, that's fair. So is there any advice you could maybe give people that haven't been through it kind of quickly around that?
Around meeting
just kind of negotiating kind of how to stock options or equity or however you work with that.
Yeah, there's a really cool book called Slicing Pie.
Yeah, I read that. Very good book.
Yeah. This is what I recommend to everyone. I, recommend to John when we started talking, and the main thing is you're going to be working together. Both of you have to feel that you're in a fair arrangement.
Totally.
And so it's we didn't use Slicing Pie, but that's kind of been the basis for a lot of the way that I think about these kind of structures.
Sure.
So that's just a short answer. I would just check that out.
No, I think that's actually really good advice. And you just kind of take stuff from, different sources and then figure out what works for you. At least that's what's kind of worked for me, right? And it sounds like that's kind of similar to you. So let's dive a bit deeper into the actual platform. So I know right now you guys are in a little bit of a closed kind of rollout. People can sign up to get early access. You guys are launching kind of to the public in shortly. but kind of walk
Yeah.
me through from kind of creating an account to actually starting to, use the platform.
Sure. So the kind of like the onboarding process is similar to most investment companies. We ask your information and we ask some risk portfolio questions. So, for example, what type of risk tolerance do you have? Ask some kind of hypothetical situation questions.
Okay.
And based off of that, we assign a target portfolio. So if you think of it like a pie chart, your target portfolio might have 70% U.S. equity, maybe 10% municipal bonds, maybe 20% foreign developed market, 10% foreign emerging market. And so we assign that based on your age, your employment status, all these questions that we ask.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that differentiates us from like a Wealthfront or something like that is that you can actually go in there and make all these kind of tweaks. So if you feel like 70% is too much or too little, you can tweak it by the percentage. You can determine in U.S. equities which sectors you want to have specific allocations for.
Right.
And so all this is building this pie chart, which is your target portfolio. And so, we're going to look at that, and we look at what equities you already have, and then we're going to make recommendations so that you're coming closer and closer towards that target portfolio. And, if one goes up and one goes down, we're going to try to rebalance so that you're constantly hovering close to that. So that's the product, as it stands right now. And like you said, people can sign up. We're kind of onboarding users, kind of using the white glove treatment for now while we enhance the product and prepare it for public launch. And what we're working on in the future is taking some strategies, for example, downside protection. You can take that entire portfolio that you have and say that you want it protected 90%, 95%. And we will do the kind of algorithmic trading of derivatives to ensure that you're guaranteed that amount of your investment.
Gotcha.
So that's what we're working on as kind of phase 2. Phase 1 is already completed, the kind of target portfolio and rebalancing, and we're onboarding users right now.
Okay. No, I think that makes sense how you guys are kind of doing the rollout. I think it makes a lot of sense because you want to make sure, and kind of have that constant kind of customer touch and people feel like they're actually kind of helping you build the product too when you kind of onboard them a little bit personally and kind of it's a little bit kind of not close is the wrong word, but kind of you just kind of slowly bring people on instead of just saying, here, and then you get like a rush of traffic and you're like, oh no, we can't handle this right out of the gate. So I think it makes a lot of sense.
The other thing is it's not a social media app, right? We're dealing with people's money, and so we want to ensure that the quality is superb.
Sure.
And so that's why each batch of users that we get so much feedback, and we're moving so fast and making improvements to everything. So it's definitely an exciting process. It took us, I want to say, 3 to 4 months to go live in that way because in finance, there's just a lot of regulatory issues and compliance stuff that you have to address. So we were very lucky to have one in the accelerator we went to. We had free legal aid. We had a lot of compliance help as well. So that's been really helpful. And we've gone through the process with the SEC, and we actually brought on a chief compliance officer to help deal with those issues.
Nice. No, that's awesome. So I'm curious, how did you guys kind of fund this or continually fund this? Did you get some money from the accelerator, or how are you guys kind of funding this right now?
Right. So, without going to super specifics, we raised a kind of friends and family round.
Nice.
And then we got some money from the accelerator program.
Okay.
And that is enough for us to kind of validate our thesis, and test with users. And then we feel that once we have that substantial user data, that people are saying hey, we really like this, we can show that people are investing in the platform and using it, then we'll be able to raise our seed round in the fall, which is what we're aiming for.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I'm curious then, how big is your team right now?
Yeah, we're pretty lean.
No, I think that's
so
great.
so my co-founder John, he handles all the business operations. He's the CEO.
Okay.
He does a lot of the research on the financial end of these strategies and how they're going to work in allocations and picking the best in class ETFs for each strategy. I handle at this point all the technical side. So and whether it's working on the website or the database or any of these kind of integrations. We are bringing on a associate software engineer in August, which is very exciting.
That's awesome.
And we also have a compliance officer.
Sure.
And the other stuff, for example, onboarding, I'm not really a great design guy. So we work with a design contractor who's been really wonderful for us. And at this point, we feel that we have enough to kind of get out there and test, like I said, test the product with users, and then we want to expand the team as soon as we can.
No, I love that. I think that makes a lot of sense, kind of how you guys are doing it. But I'm curious to know, you guys kind of you write a lot about using React, React Native. I'm curious to know your experience with that and why you guys decided to choose that.
Sure.
Maybe actually,
so
before that, give an overview of what React is for people that don't know.
Sure. So Facebook released React. It's basically a JavaScript library that kind of helps to organize user interactions and interfaces.
Okay.
And you started for the web, so to instead of kind of a clunky spaghetti mess of JavaScript code, kind of have a well-structured components, they call them, which decide, like, if you press this button or you type in this input, these are the ways that we're going to interact with the user.
Right.
So it's been, I just feel that it's very intuitive, very easy to use. And I was, immediately attracted to it when I was first learning to program. Now, since then, React has, people are like, hey, we like this, so we want to use this in our other platforms. So then, Facebook released React Native, which is for mobile devices, iOS and Android.
Right.
And I hear there's also a React VR out. I haven't used it.
Yeah, but it's pretty new, but yeah.
Yeah. So it's become, it went from being kind of a small thing when I was first learning it. Like, at the time when I was learning programming, Angular was much more popular.
Sure.
But for whatever reasons, I just felt more comfortable using this, and now it's just ubiquitous. So one of my first jobs was, and this was before React Native was very popular, was as a React Native developer for a mobile app. And I realized that in New York City, there wasn't a lot of resources for this technology. So I ended up founding, with two other members, Harry and Nick, the first React Native meetup in New York City.
Nice.
And it's gone. We've had sponsors from American Express to Oscar Health to Delivery.com and Priceline. So all these large companies now are really interested in the technology and how they can use it.
Sure. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I've done kind of some mobile app dev stuff in the past. And it can be tricky to use one code base to build for multiple platforms. And so I'm curious to know, what have you learned that you can kind of give people advice about kind of using that? Because people, for the most part, people expect a different experience between Android and iOS. I know Google has kind of their material design, and if you use any of their apps kind of on Android and then go to iOS, they're pretty similar. There's subtle differences, but I think the average person won't really notice a huge difference. But how have you kind of noticed, or what kind of advice can you give people when they're thinking about using something like React Native kind of to build these mobile apps, or even just React itself?
Sure. Um, I mean, for React Native, what I normally tell people is, if it's mainly in the case if you're a startup, right?
Okay.
If you're trying to, like we are, trying to prove an idea, trying to get it in the hands of users, a lot of times you're going to need both platforms.
Right.
And, at that point, I think it would be foolish not to heavily consider using something like React Native, because at this point, the adoption is pretty broad. You have, I think Airbnb is using it. Obviously, Facebook is using it in some of their apps.
Yeah.
And so, hey, if those guys can use it, I think, your startup can too.
Sure.
People might disagree with me. Now,
Yeah.
if you're a larger company and you have more resources and you want an Android team and an iOS team, yeah, that I can definitely see use cases for that. But I think the platform has evolved where it allows for customizing views and styles depending on which platform as well. So I definitely, if you're in that position, and definitely take a good look at it and talk to people that are using it. That would be my advice.
Sure.
And then on the web, I would just say that React is become pretty standard by now. There are a lot of positions in React, and so it's definitely worth knowing.
No, sure. And I think
Yeah.
the other thing, too, to your point, is you can build with these kind of like one code base that compiles the different native apps. And then eventually, if you're like,
Hmm.
you know what, we want to build a native Android or iOS app, you
Right.
can do that and just push the next update is just a native version instead of like a, one
Hmm.
React app. So I think you're not limited to that. And I've seen kind of companies go back and forth between the two. So you can easily do that. And I think the thing to kind of stress again that you mentioned is being able to build fast and test these things
Right.
fast, right?
Build
And
fast, and that, yeah, the iteration cycle. The quicker you can get that, the better your company is going to be.
totally. And I think too that maybe if people haven't built kind of an Android or iOS native app, like you can't really share any code. And in some cases you can't
Right.
even really share assets. And so, and by assets I mean
Right.
kind of like graphics and stuff
Hmm.
like that. And so
Hmm.
it's a lot more work building two separate things in the thing. So I think if you haven't done it, you should look at using something like React or other kind of one code based kind of frameworks. I personally don't mind React. I think it makes a lot of sense, especially in a lot of cases. And so I
Hmm.
think it's great that you guys did that. I'm kind of curious to know though, kind of back to the platform a little bit. Um,
Hmm.
how do you guys kind of decide where you're going kind of next? Are you taking in a lot of user feedback and saying, we really want to develop this feature? Or are you guys trying to stick a little bit
Yeah.
to your kind of mission, a little bit saying, no, we're going to keep going this direction? Or is it a bit of both? Or how do you
Hmm.
decide what to build next into the platform?
Right. That's a great question. To answer it, it's always a little bit of both, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, just, we started bringing on actual users about 3 weeks ago,
Okay.
and just that experience alone has shown us so much. So it's a game changer getting users on the system and validating that. And, we would have done it sooner, except, like I said, for compliance reasons, we have
Right.
to go through all these processes.
Sure.
Um, but that has been a big eye opener. But at the same time, you need your vision too, and so you can't just be reactive when it comes to user feedback. You really need to strategize what is going to be beneficial for all the users on your platform. And you want to address as many edge cases as you can. For long-term planning, we talk to our users, and we have a Slack channel where we're able to communicate with users and get their feedback. So yeah, talk to users, collect as much information as you possibly can, but also be willing to think outside of the box as far as what you should be building, as far as like large feature sets.
No,
That's what I would say at this point.
no, I think that's really good advice. And I love how you guys kind of launched pretty early on in your development to actually start getting users and getting their
No.
feedback. And to your point, I like how you guys are kind of, just basically your every feature request that you will get in your startup, you can't build, right? And if you do try to do that, you
Right.
basically just
Right.
end up chasing your tail. And so I kind of
Right.
like I
Yeah.
like your advice around kind of it's a bit of both, right? Because you will get
Hmm.
a bunch at some point, like there's a tipping point and everybody kind of needs to decide where that tipping point is. Maybe it's 10 requests, maybe it's 20 requests, maybe it's
Right.
100 requests for that feature, and then you're like, well, maybe we should build this or maybe we shouldn't build this. But if
Right.
it's just one off requests, you will
Mm.
go crazy trying to support all that. So I think that's really good advice to people, that you guys are kind of a bit of both, right?
Yeah, and it's a compromise. Like, you also have to look at, you have to estimate how long each one will take, right?
Sure.
So I'm the type of person, I like to knock off a lot of the small things first,
Yep.
and and then bigger things. It requires, if it's a small thing, then you don't really need to worry about it that much. You can just do it. But if it's a large feature request, then we as a team need to meet and really think about how that affects us going forward.
Sure. Well, and those large features can take weeks or months of development, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So
yep.
I'm curious though to know how often are you guys pushing code live to your users? Is it kind of a weekly thing? Is it a couple times a month? I know it's pretty early on. You've only
Hmm.
been kind of live 3 weeks, but how long have you guys kind of do you think you guys will be potentially pushing code, or how often have you been pushing code right now?
Oh, it's definitely multiple times a day.
Nice.
Uh,
No,
yeah.
that's great, man.
I mean, that's yeah, and we have kind of different environments set up so that we can test things on sandbox environment and production environment. And we're using, at this point, we're using Heroku for
Yep.
our kind
Love
of
Heroku.
hosting.
Yep. Yep.
And I've worked with DigitalOcean and AWS and everything, but for us at this scale, we just want the easiest solution possible. And
Sure.
that has made it very easy to push updates and move really fast without having to worry a lot about the DevOps side of things.
No, that's actually a really interesting point because DevOps DevOps people can be tricky to find in itself, right? And then obviously
Right,
cost and
right.
blah blah blah, and like, so I think having a service that kind of handles that for you is a huge kind of stress release or reliever, I should say. But I'm curious to
Hmm.
know, how are you guys pulling a lot of kind of analytics or metrics built into the software to actually kind of see what people are doing with the software? Because
Hmm.
sometimes what they tell you isn't necessarily what they're doing, at least in my
Right.
experience.
Yeah. So for us, we Google Analytics is number one,
Sure.
just to cover your basis, and then we use one or two other third-party analytics vendors to kind of get more fine-tuned analytics data.
Sure.
Um, but for us, like at this stage, we're really lucky that we are, because we're taking in batches, smaller batches at a time. We're actually able to get the face-to-face feedback,
Nice.
which is really great. So we're able to see both. I mean, obviously, the biggest sign of people using that it being a good fit is that people are using it and they're putting their money in to invest in the different products. So that's the main gauge that we use to determine our product success, and then narrowing down is user interviews and looking at those analytics.
Sure. No, I think that's great. But sadly, Tom, we're
Hmm.
coming to the end of the show. So let's close with mentioning where people can get more information about yourself and Commandiv.
Hmm. Sure. So as for Commandiv, you can visit our website at commandiv.com, Commandiv. And as for myself, please, connect on LinkedIn. I do write a lot on LinkedIn. As you mentioned, I was one of the top 10 writers in technology last year. And then I'm also on Twitter at Tom Goldenberg. So please connect there. I love just kind of creating discussions around some of the things happening in tech. And so I also organize a meetup called Startup Founder Panel, where we take a topic every month or two and go really in depth on it. And so I've been doing those panel discussions and writing on LinkedIn and Medium. So please check me out. I'm Tom Goldenberg on all those platforms.
The panel stuff, is that in person, or are you guys posting any of that online or doing that live online?
Yeah, so what we do is we audio record, and then we put the audio on SoundCloud.com. So
Nice.
if you just search for Startup Founder Panel on SoundCloud, you'll find kind of our latest panels. We had one on seed round fundraising recently, a really great panel. We've done one on building culture at startups,
Nice.
and we also did one on cybersecurity in startups.
Very cool.
So those are available. I also usually take that content and use it to write a blog post on the subject as well.
Got you. Perfect, Tom. Well, I really appreciate you taking the day out, or the time out of your day to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you. And I think we should probably do another one of these maybe later in the year to kind of see where you've come and what you've kind of learned and what you've kept and changed from kind of the original platform.
Absolutely. I would love to do that. This was a lot of fun.
Perfect, man. Well, you have a good rest of your day, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Take care.
Bye. Thanks for listening. The music for the show was done by Electric Mantra. You can check them out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.